We know risk is there, but nobody wants to take the risk. Very, very important for all of us to know here. Now you know that there is a loss, there is a amount of risk that is involved, where the risk is so well inbound that there is no way, there is a very, very remote chance. So what we typically try to do even in the insurance sector is that good morning and welcome to the fifth session in Unit 4, Principles and Practice of General Insurance, where we are going to talk about the statistics spreading of risk. Now, this is a very, very important session. Why? Because we are now going to talk about the risk factor. What do we mean by risk? Risk refers to the probable disadvantageous or undesirable, unprofitable outcome of a fortuitous event, an event which is not desired, nevertheless taking place. Now, risk has got a very, very complicated definition altogether. The reason is very simple. Why? Because whenever we talk about risk, whenever we talk about these factors, risk has got a different feeling, different attitude altogether. Now, what do we mean by risk? Risk is something that is unforeseen. Risk is something that cannot be predicted. Risk is something that is there, but we never know when it is going to pop up, when it's going to crop up at that particular instance or that particular situation altogether. So that's why we say here, risk refers to the probable disadvantages, undesirable. So probability is always there, which tries to tell us statistically that there is a risk that is involved, but we are not able to predict the risk on an accurate manner. So that unprofitable outcome of the fortuitous event that we do not know. Why? Because though risk is inherently involved, but you are not able to predict it, this event is not desired. We don't want that to happen. We know risk is there, but nobody wants to take the risk. Nobody wants that risk to be evidently coming out. Nobody wants that risk to be told very, very clearly. But then, we have to understand that risk is also an inherent part of the business. So most of the time in insurance, what has to be understood, what has to be evidently spoken and taken into picture is that though the risk factor is there, we have to be very, very careful that we have to avoid that risk as far as possible. Followed by this involves the selection of those business activity where there is a minimum amount of risk. For example, buying a property or business in order to not take on the liability that comes with it. Now, what happens is that insurance companies are also like any other organization which do not want to take unnecessary risk. Now, they want to cover only those businesses where the risk factor is limited in nature. Now, suppose they give insurance or they take a coverage for a particular factor where the risk is on a higher level. What will happen is that the loss will also go to the higher level if the risk occurs. So that's why they typically look for a kind of business where the risk is at the limited level as far as possible. Now, if you say, let's say that you're going to buy a house, or you're going to buy a piece of land, or you're going to construct a villa, or you're going to construct a small house, what happens there is that there is not going to be much of a risk factor unless and until there's going to be an earthquake or landslide, which is not going to happen on a daily basis. So bringing in a property or building or a business, the risk factor is considerably less rather than going for marine insurance or a fire insurance or that of a aviation insurance altogether. So these kind of things, the risk factor is high, but then in a building or a property, the risk factor is lesser. Not flying in order to take that risk of airplane was to be hijacked. And that's one thing what we are supposed to look in. Not flying in order. The plane was not flying, but it was only an hijack kind of a thing. It's still better on that factor. Not to visit border areas at the time of war tension. Not definitely no. Nobody wants to take that kind of a risk. You know that war was already going on, so nobody now wants to enter into a border area and get hit. So definitely not. Avoid manufacturing and marketing of product which patent copyright is doubtful. Definitely don't go into an insurance sector, auto coverage of a product where the copyright is doubtful, where the product is already in a controversy. No insurance company would like to go ahead and give an insurance to that kind of a product. Why? Because the concept of insurance is to avoid risk. The concept of insurance is to keep risk at the bay as far as possible. They don't want to take insurance and run with it. They don't want to go with the risk factor just like that. They want to understand the inherent risk, try to mitigate the risk, try to lessen the risk, and then provide the insurance factor. The next one, risk prevention. How can be this done? This can be done by eliminating the cause of loss. Very, very important. The cause of loss, protecting the loss from the things or the persons exposed to damage or injury, minimizing the loss when it can all occur. Now, very, very important for all of us to know here. Now, you know that there is a loss. There is a amount of risk that is involved. What you need to do is prevent that loss from happening. So you need to identify very clearly what is the cause for that loss to happen. That's very, very important for all of us to know here. So what we will tend to do is that we will try to find what is the cause of that loss factor to happen, and then we shall go ahead and protect it. That is very, very important. Let's not try to go to a situation where we will fight and we will create that loss altogether. No, we don't want to do that. What we want to do is that we will try to protect it. We will try to see how far the loss can be avoided. Now, for example, you are in a glass manufacturing industry. Now, once you have finished preparing your materials and you want to export it, you will think 10 times on the terms of packaging so that the materials don't get damaged and you are able to get a full return for your products. So which means the cause of damage can most probably happen during the shipping, during the transportation, or during the handling of goods. So you will try to spend more time while handling of goods rather than just on the manufacturing part. So that's where we would first try to find out the cause, the reasons for the loss to happen. Based on that, we will try to protect those sectors, protect those areas, protect those events altogether so that we can reduce the damage, we can reduce the risk factors, and then we will be able to get a profitable business. So even the insurance companies will try to minimize the loss as far as possible, will try to minimize the exposure of risk as far as possible, and then they shall go ahead in terms of packing and moving the goods altogether. Followed by the risk assumption. This refers that an individual or firm is assuming the risk itself, bearing the factor of uncertainty. Now, most of the time, the companies, the organizations itself will understand that there is a risk inherently there. So we will assume the risk and we will continue with uncertainty. So most of the organizations also understand the factor that they will tend to go with the insurance with the point taken into account that there is some uncertainty, there are some challenges in the business, but nevertheless, We will continue doing that so that we are able to understand the situation and take it forward with those factors. That's why we will try to understand that businesses understand the factors of uncertainty. Business already have it in the mind. Yes, this is uncertain. This situation cannot be taken. So we will understand it. We will go for it. And then we shall start building up the factors altogether. Similarly, this is also known as self-insurance. What is this factor called as? Self-insurance. It might be due to the ignorance or by the choice, particularly when the risk is so remote that any step taken to minimize or eliminate it would be considered to be uneconomical. There are some times where you would not be able to eliminate the risk. There are some times where the risk is so well inbound that there is no way. There is a very, very remote chance, almost impossible in terms of solving the risk. So what happens there is that any step taken to minimize or eliminate it itself would be considered uneconomical in nature. So at that point of time, I would not even think about the risk factor. I would just say that, okay, let's not even think about it. Let's not even do about it. Let's forget it. Let's not even think about bringing that risk factor into picture. So I would just try to be as, in terms of just removing the risk as far as possible. I would just take it up with me and go forward with it. The risk distribution here. This involves spreading risk by means of group sharing, such as partnership or company information of business organization. So very, very important here. You have to understand this involves the spreading of risk by means of group sharing, such as partnership or any other company information factor where you are just trying to get associated. You are just trying to spread that information as far as possible, as close as possible. So this becomes very, very important for all of us to understand and take it forward. This is mandatory. This is quite important for us. So you can, spread the risk. What I'm trying to say here is I can divide the risk. I don't have to take a risk all by myself. I can mitigate the risk as far as possible. So that's why we look for mergers, we look for partnerships, we look for all kind of alliances as far as possible so that we can reduce the risk factor in the long run. Followed by hedging and neutralization. This actually involves in offsetting the loss from occurrence of a risk by compensating the gain with that activity. So what do I typically do here is that I try to see those factors where I can go forward and reduce the risk as far as possible. So where can I put in those factors? Where can I bring in those cushion factors, the backup, so that the risk can get automatically neutralized altogether? Now, for example, if I am in the stock market, I would not tell the investor to put the entire money on one stock. On the other way, on the contrary, what I will say is that invest 25% of your money on equities, 25% of your money on derivatives, 25% of your money on mutual funds, and the remaining 25% on commodities altogether. Whereby I will try to reduce the risk of my investor, of my client, so that he does not incur a complete loss. Why? Because even if one sector fails, the other sectors will definitely pick up. So what we typically try to do even in the insurance sector is that we try to bring in a hedge factor. We try to bring in a compensating factor here through which one can gain from the other activity. So they get compensated. The risk does not keep flowing everywhere. That's why we try to do this particular activity. Followed by the elimination of the risk factor. It is illogical to spread risks that are eliminated entirely, and much efforts are usually made by the business community to improve their equipment and methods of working so that unnecessary element of risk can be avoided. So what is the intention for us? Why do we need to do this factor? Why do we think that we have to do it? What we normally tend to do is that it is illogical for all of us to spread risk that can be eliminated entirely. No, we cannot eliminate the risk at any point of time. That is not possible at all. So what we tend to do here is that we tend to take efforts. We tend to take factors where we usually believe that by the business community so that we can improve their equipment. We want them to improve their process, improve their way of service delivery, their methodology, so that when you practice, when you perform better, the risk will be reduced automatically. Now, what happens is that all of us know that every physical exercise that we do, that we involve, has got some risk. But that risk can be eliminated by a careful training under a proper guidance so that the risk of getting injured can be reduced. So similarly, we advise the companies very clearly that at any point of time, whenever you are involved in doing something, involve your methodology better, improve your methodology so that you will be able to avoid risk and deliver better results in the long run. Now, risk transfer. Moving further, when we talk about the risk transfer, this guarantee is to one person guaranteeing that another against the risk of loss. So somewhere I need a backup. So what do I do is that I give a backup to somebody who's ready to guarantee me at that position. In case of risk, I am there. I will help you out at any point of time. So that is where the risk transfer now starts coming into picture. When I'm transferring the risk, I am putting my stake on somebody else. That person is ready to back me out at any given point of time. This is very, very important. Why? Because I am not just trying to escape from the situation. I am not saying here that the risk is like that, okay, we'll go forward with it. No, that's not my intention here. My intention is that give me a position, give me a chance by which I would be able to mitigate that loss factor altogether. I don't want to take that risk completely on me. I want to transfer the risk to somebody so that he can back me up at the time of emergency. With this, I would like to come to the end of this particular session. And all the information, I hope and believe that all the information that has been shared through this particular session would be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall try to understand more about the practices of general insurance. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.